I can't tell what extraordinary event this is. We succeeded in having lots of foreign authors here and a few very famous ones. And the Frenchies are the next very famous authors here in Holland who are coming to Noordwijk, a little city, a little village of the past.
What was I saying? Oh yes, I was saying that in Holland, this is the first time, this is the first country we get published in. So, Waiting for Wednesday, our new novel, hasn't been published in the UK yet. So it's launched in the Netherlands. So it's very, it feels very important. So when we come here and you are our first readers, so it's very exciting for us.
Yeah. Most of the people who are here tonight probably know now that Nicci French is a couple by night. You probably still get the answer of the question sometimes. Nicci French, huh? Is that a couple? Or don't you?
See, it's interesting because when we first started being published, especially in Holland, people didn't know. Well, why would they? We didn't publish under the name of Nicci French, and I think it was just my photograph for a bit, so there was a bit of a cheat going on there. But in a way, that's how we want. It's not a secret that we're two people, but we want to be read as one person, as the person called Nicci French. So that great joy of reading a novel and you escape your life and you sink into a novel and there's a voice speaking to you. You've got this relationship with this voice, and that's what we want. It would be no good if people read the novel and didn't like it, but we said to them, but it's so clever, it's two different people. We just want people to read, to hear this particular single voice, and that's the voice of Nicci French. And we think it is just one voice. So.
Yeah, it is a compliment then when people are saying, oh, is it a couple?
Well,
yeah.
Well, one of the strange things about Nicci and me writing together is I think people, sometimes when people talk to us about it, I think they have two really big misconceptions. The first is they think, well, because you write together, clearly you have this perfect marriage and you never ever have an argument.
Oh, we're going to talk about it.
Right, so that's a big that's a big subject. And the second thing people say is they think, oh, you write novels together. So it's really an amazing coincidence. You two people got married and you're just exactly the same kind of writers, and you somehow fit together. And that's almost the strangest part of it, because actually when Nicci and I write separately, we're very, very different writers. If you read one page of a Nicci Gerald novel, you would never think that it would be something I could have written, and the same. And if something I'd written, Nicci would definitely not want anyone to think that she'd written it. We have a very different style, we have a different sensibility, but when we get together, we become something different.
Well, the most important question we had on the table, I think, was how does it work? Do you write together, or do you write sentence per sentence, or how does it work? Maybe that's...
Well, we've got a kind of method, although to call it a method is to make it sound neater than it actually is, which we started with our first novel, and it's more or less continued. And what we do is, the first thing to say is that we never write together. So what we do is we spend weeks and months planning the novel, and that can take an awful long time, and it involves having ideas that we can't quite agree on, and we have to wait until we have an idea that we both fall in love with and want to live with for the year. And then we work out the plot, the characters, the kind of voice of the novel, and also why it is that we're writing it, like the beating heart of the novel. And then when we feel that we've both got the same novel in each other's heads, then we start to write. And I write at the top of our house in an attic, And Sean writes in a shed in the garden. So. It's a nice shed.
Yes,
Yeah, maybe Sean, that's nice to describe your shed. How does it look like?
Well, my shed is it's a very nice wooden hut that's out in the garden. And one of the important things it's got, when we were choosing, I got a shed built there, is I took my laptop and walked around the garden and found somewhere that I couldn't get online, I couldn't receive the internet, because it's very important for me to be away from any kind of distraction. And yeah, so what the way we actually write is that so when we get to this point, when we feel that we've got the same book in our heads, that we're both passionate about the same idea, that we sort of know the journey we're going on, and then we just let's say Nicci will write a chapter and pass it, and then pass it to me, and then I'm free to change, adjust it, make little delicate changes to it, and then I'll write something and hand it back to her, and Nicci will say, "This is absolutely perfect, and needs nothing to it." And then we go through this, and then we really just go through that process, just handing it back and forwards until we get to the end, and we get a sort of first draft.
I think we worked out that we have 3 rules, I think. The first one is that we never tell anybody who wrote which bits. And that feels quite important because we've both got to own every kind of comma and dot in the book, every bit of every word we've both got to be happy with. So it's no good if someone says, "Well, I didn't like that bit." I'm not allowed to say, "Well, that Sean wrote that." We both, it's got to belong to both of us. The second rule is that if I write something that I love and I give it to Sean and he erases it, which has been known, I'm not allowed then to just put it back in again. So if we change each other, then we can't re-change it back. Yes, the third rule is, what's the third rule? Oh, the third rule is that when we've written a chapter, and in fact we don't show it to each other, we send it to each other. Of course, Sean has to come in from the shed to receive it, because he can't get in there.
It's too far away.
But, so we'll send it to each other, and we won't sit down with each other and talk about what's wrong with it. So it's not that if I write something, Sean's not allowed to sit beside me like a teacher with his red pen and saying, "That's no good, and how could you use such a clumsy expression here, and I don't like that." We just do it invisibly. So it's quite surprising when you then receive it back and you realise things have been changed. But actually all those 3 rules there's a kind of principle behind them, and I think it's the principle of trust. I think we have to trust that we're making each other better. And also just the act of writing together it's such a kind of strange thing to do, and it's so exposing when you hand over your precious words and then somebody writes over them. And so we just have to know that we're each other's kind of best reader, best editor, best friend in the process. And that's what all the rules emerge from, I think.
Was it always that clear that you're going to write thrillers and not a novel, or when you write together?
Okay. So, well, it was kind of... when we first wrote The Memory Game, that's our first novel, the idea was an idea, we didn't... When we first started thinking about writing together, we didn't say we will write a thriller together, but the first idea that we had, that we both fell for, was an idea that had to be a kind of psychological thriller. So our first book was a psychological thriller, and then we called ourselves Nicci French, and kind of Nicci French became the writer of psychological thrillers. But, there are a couple of things. Wasn't just random, of course. The first, if we were writing together, we couldn't write kind of a modernist experimental novel because you need some kind of structure to hold the 2 of us together, I think. And also, we just found that with the kind of thrillers that are being written now, that we want to be writing, there's such a wonderful, elastic form. You can do anything. You can be as dark or as strange within them as you want. And they seem to be a very good way for us to explore all the things that make us anxious or make us lonely or make us jealous or make us feel turbulent. It's a very good way of exploring the fears that we all have today.
Okay. In 2011, Blue Monday was released, the first book in your first series with main character Frida Klein. Can you explain shortly what the series is about?
I'll try and be very brief. Well, it was really almost a big part of our identity up to that point was that we'd never written a series, and there was really particular reason for that, because which Nicci's partly explained before, which is that we wanted to show how the fears of how close ordinary life is to being very terrifying. And so in a way, what we constantly tried to explore was people who, in a way, didn't realise they were in a thriller, and suddenly they were living their ordinary life and probably hoping they were in a romantic comedy, and suddenly something terrible would happen and they'd be dragged into a very frightening situation, and the question is how would they deal with that? But we almost got to a certain point, and also another reason why we couldn't, there was occasionally we'd have a character that we'd be interested in recurring and revisiting, but because we weren't dealing with police men or police women, we could, in a way, it becomes, it would have to be very artificial, like Agatha Christie's Miss Marple, who every time she goes on holiday, there's a kind of body found floating in the pool. And in a way, we always try to be realistic. But what we talked about this character together, this Frida Klein, who's an analyst, and we became so intrigued with her as someone who would be a certain, almost a different kind of detective. Because if you're a psychoanalyst, what you are doing is you ferret out people's secrets. You go into the kind of the dark interior of people's lives. And we wanted to think what would be interesting if someone like her was then dragged out of her consulting room, solving people's interior problems and forced to deal with the kind of messy problems of the world, of the real world. And it felt, and because she was a really complicated, contradictory, divided character, she was someone we thought, this isn't just wrapping her story up in one book just will not feel right. She's someone who we want to see over a period of years, where we can sort of get to gradually peel away the layers.
Because you wanted to be short, I'll add one more sentence, which is that what we've envisaged is 8 books which you can read completely separately, so they have their own kind of satisfaction and their own endings. But in the first book, Blue Monday, we want to start a story that will then continue, a kind of overarching bigger story that will continue through the 8 books and culminate in the 8th book. So it's like there are 8 small stories and one big story. But also the other thing is that Frida is her own story as well. She's a bit like a kind of ticking bomb herself, I think.
Yeah, I think so too, because she's changing through the 3 books already. From the first book she was, all the family and friends could rely on her, and she was always there whenever she was needed. But in part 3, it's gonna be totally different, I think.
Well, in a way, that's one of the things that was attractive about writing a series, which is that people do change over time, and nobody's a kind of unified and coherent person. We're different at different times in our lives, so we wanted to look at Frida and the kind of group of characters that she has around her and show how they're marked by time. I mean, Frida might cheer up, Thursday and Friday.